All right, welcome back to the Loud Sound Epicenter podcast. Today I'm joined by one of our favorite guests, Thomas777, the shaman. Thank you for returning. And Jose, thank you for also returning for the second time on the Loud Sound Epicenter podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on, man.
Today, last week on the Mind Phaser episode with Thomas, we went through the Carlyle's model of the heroic side of history. And as we get closer to the midterms and see candidates like J.D. Vance, who we'll be talking about in Ohio, succeeding and sort of the populist movements rally behind them as they exist right now, where does that leave Trump in 2024 for the presidential election? I'd like to continue the model we've been using from the Mind Phaser episode with Carlyle, and additionally throw in Jonathan Bowden, who's a complementary add-on to kind of working in that similar perspective. So, Thomas, where do you see Trump's role on the right as we inch closer to 2024 and the midterms as well?
What's interesting, man, like we talked about on the pod, first of all, let me qualify this. I won't go too far afield by rehashing, the thoughts that I had in mind 6 months ago, but I honestly did not think that Trump was going to mount this kind of comeback. Like, not because I didn't think he had the support base to do so, or that the ground organization was not there, or that his constituency did not remain loyal. If anything, I think it's probably grown. Okay, owing to factors that I don't know if you want to dive into or not. But I thought that the Republican Party would have sought to buy Trump off with some kind of coveted posting. Certainly a man like Trump wouldn't be slated for an ambassadorship, but I had the notion that Conservatism Inc. might have gotten behind this. Like, remember we were talking about that like nascent media brand Trump was talking about launching, but then just kind of went bust or just was like abandoned. Okay, I kind of envision Trump as being insinuated into a role like that. Some kind of high profile yet ultimately powerless in policy terms role that was approved by Conservative Inc. But there was no real threat to the kind of regime and its and the parameters of what's acceptable in terms of policy discussion as determined by gatekeepers like Mitch McConnell or what have you. So I did not think just another Trump challenge to the regime was in the running. So I actually gained a lot of respect for Mr. Trump that is the case. Like we talked about, his CPAC announcement got knocked out of the news cycle by the international situation in Ukraine. My take, and like Jose was talking about the Vance on the primary debate panel, talking about striking a patriotic America First stance on the Ukraine issue, but specifically of opposing any effort to implement a no-fly zone, which would be an incredibly stupid idea as well as unworkable. But the point is, the Republicans are going to have a real problem because this is kind of the neocons kind of see this as their moment. They're going to try and insinuate people like Pence to say like, where our national security is in jeopardy because Biden is weak on Russia and he didn't, if we'd had an actual executive at the helm who was able to demonstrate a credible deterrent, like this never would have happened in the first place. That typical kind of paranoid cant that suggests that Russia is some grave threat to the to European security. A typically Zionist Zionist position, like dressed up for middle American Goyish audiences as some type of patriotic and manly interest in national security. So the Republican if the Republican mainstream, if they're not careful, they're gonna find you know the White House primary being a litmus test, essentially, an interventionism in America first, and they're going to get their asses kicked if they let that, you know, become the kind of framing policy question. And it may very well be, man. I mean, you know, you're looking at a situation of genuine structural stability in terms of the economy, whether we're talking about, you know, stocks, whether we're talking about currencies, whether we're talking about, I know that like the Bureau of Labor Statistics, you know, they're always trying to scaremonger about you know, some kind of punctuated shortage vis-a-vis commodities, or some kind of, you know, or some kind of critical crisis event relating to commodities. I'm no economist or like finance type, but that's not going to happen. Okay. I'm not saying that people now aren't struggling, because a lot of people are, and that's permanent. Okay, but there's not going to be a repeat of 2008. And moving forward, there's a lot of uncertainty has been eliminated from the global economy. In terms of things that were very much in play like 20 years ago, in terms of information awareness. I mean, okay, and predictive modeling. So that is going to make things like national security questions or war and peace questions that are framed as national security issues, whether they actually are or not, that's going to give them a certain preeminence that they would not ordinarily have if, you know, there was some other pressing issue on the table, you know, at least in terms of public perception. So Trump has a real opportunity here, if he's going to frame his candidacy as, you know, not just that, you know, it's us, the people, versus the elites, because they literally canceled the 2020 election and installed a man in the White House who had no mandate to rule. But they also, you know, they're a party of warmongers who are trying to insinuate us into a disastrous war that, you know, against a country whose really only offense was you know, refusing to abide globalism and the social engineering that attends globalism. And if there's the Republicans establishment's going to have a real problem on its hands if the primary season becomes, like I said, a referendum on this kind of conceptual, it's, you know, no, and these kinds of conceptual notions, okay, because that's going to raise people's consciousness in a way that I don't really think has existed since the interwar years. You know, I'm talking, you know, between the world wars, you know, coming up on a century ago now. That was long-winded, man. I didn't mean to go for that long. Feel free to interrupt, man. Like if I'm rambling, you know. But yeah, that's my take, man.
No, for sure. And Jose, I want to segue it over to you with something that I know that you're privy to. I think that one of the most interesting things that we're seeing right now is the momentum of the one specific part of the right, which is the Peter Thiel network. And between this year and I think 2024, there's going to be a movement coming together on that side of the populist right. It sounds like Trump is sympathetic to it, maybe at face value, but you know, I think I'm curious if the kind of Thiel network is hedging their bets to replace the Trump revolution as controlled opposition, or if they take the Trump model and adopt an institution alongside it, the thing that Trump failed to leave in place for his supporters when he had the opportunity. So if Thiel can have the resources to support people that have a better grasp on how DC operates, how to be a bully pulpit in office, I think Trump has to face that populist right coalition eventually, if he isn't already talking to them already. But what do you think about Jose? Because I know you've been writing about some of these developments. Are we having mic issues?
Yeah, it seems to be.
Yeah,
Oh,
I was muted. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, for 2024, in my view, that's Trump's race to lose. There is really no credible challengers against him. Even like DeSantis, like if you look at a lot of polls, is trailing well behind him. And more than likely, I would not be shocked if DeSantis is Trump's running mate in 2024. Now, in terms of the neoconservative influence, to me, they're going to probably try to do a redux of like the first Trump administration of trying to just embed themselves in like the State Department and all of that with like the staffing decisions. You saw it with like John Bolton and then like rabid Zionists like Mike Pompeo and that ilk. That's probably what they're going to try to do. What's going to be more interesting, in my opinion, though, are going to be like the congressional races, these primaries, and all of that. Because if these populists are able to build, let's say, a coalition of like 20 to 30 people that are well to like the non-interventionist right of Trump, you will get different types of potential policy outcomes. More importantly, also like staff too. That's where I do believe the Thiel people can have like some degree of synergy with the Trump people so that you can create a much more coherent type of like populist, like non-interventionist, old right type of coalition. Because right now, and I would say like from 2016 to 2020, you still had a lot of like those residual elements of neoconservatism among the Republicans in Congress, but I think it's slowly changing. You're already seeing a small but growing group of people in the House, especially like Republicans from like Paul Gosar to Marjorie Taylor Greene, Thomas Massey, that are consistently voting against these stupid Russia sanctions and all that. And it's only like 8 to 12 of these people, but you have to start somewhere. And I say this coming from a background doing grassroots lobbying. It really boils down to numbers of reps you have that you can count on to like vote consistently for your pet issue. And we at least have something to work with. Yeah, it's going to take a while. It's probably going to be like a decade or so before you have like a pretty sizable America First coalition. But I do believe that JD Vance's victory is a very good first step, because if he turns into like a Robert Taft 2.0, you do have somebody that can build a legitimate network and power base to get people elected down ballot, whether it's like the U.S. House or maybe a fellow U.S. senator. Because like the only other like person in the Senate that is like one of like the primary obstacles to this whole Russia hysteria is probably like Rand Paul.
Yeah.
That's like pretty much it. And even Rand Paul supported that stupid Lend-Lease 2.0 type of bill that that these swamp critters are trying to push through to just escalate more tensions with Russia. But JD Vance is a great addition, and I do see him as somebody that will shift the matrix of policy outcomes in the Senate and start getting other like Republicans like elected. Because that's one of the things too, that once you get somebody like him elected, you just have to build like that network out and start getting people like the down ballot and then work your way up. And that's how you get to see political change come into effect.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. If I could throw in an anecdote real quick. Last year, I had the opportunity to go to Arizona at it's called the Republican National Renewal, which is kind of a bit of a more grassroots leaning organization. But they put on this populist organization alongside Turning Point USA. And one of the people there, as you said, Gosar, and Arizona is really a hub for a lot of these populist types. Wendy Rogers was there, and one of Thiel's candidates, his other one, Blake Masters, was also present. And so, as this populist side gains momentum and isn't exclusive to just Arizona, that may be, as you said, the future of the GOP, which has a trickle down effect and influences people like Trump and other people to follow their lead and to kind of take things in that direction. Because as we know, Trump isn't an ideologue, and he's very limited as far as probably just which direction he goes in probably depends on the people around him. And so if you have this coalition that's already developing, I'm very optimistic about that. And I don't think it's just in Arizona. I think that is going to quickly spread to other places. And so I'm here for it. I think that
Yeah,
that's
definitely. And I would add too that Ohio is like one of those realignment states. It's firmly red now. And I venture to say it's even more, it's redder than Texas, where I'm at. And I do think Republicans will win it pretty easily in 2024 and beyond. These Midwestern states with large white working class populations, they're going to be very ripe for the GOP. I expect if the GOP doubles down on the old right, America first, um, non-interventionist, strong border protection type of platform, just like a two-pronged platform like that, just stick to the basics and then also add in some traditional value stuff. They've easily got the Midwest on lock and they can complete that realignment, because if they just stick to this pseudo populism or some like revamp, like neoconservative thing type of shtick, they're just going to get blown out. In my view, that's like a zombified corpse that needs to just get put down for good. Yeah, and I do think that JD Vance is a harbinger to come, and people should definitely be ready to throw down, because that we're going to be seeing these type of jousting matches between the populist right and the neoconservative, the residual neocons in the Republican Party. That's going to be one of the more interesting forms of factional infighting that's going to go down within the GOP, and I'm absolutely here for it. I mean, I got my start in politics effectively working inside the Republican Party and simultaneously working against it to just purge it out of purge all these like dumb neocon or just lifeless chamber of commerce types to get more principled constitutionalists, paleo-conservatives, paleo-libertarians, you name it, like anybody on like the dissident right, like elected in that spectrum.
Yeah, and as someone said in chat, there's an opportunity here for the old right to gain relevancy and compete on the national level. Thomas, I saw you've been hyping up JD Vance as a candidate, and he's definitely gone through probably a few different eras throughout his candidacy. But recently, kind of sticking his neck out for controversial people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, and just kind of stepping outside the elite mindset, Joe Sobron's the hive mind type deal. I was curious what caught your eye specifically when you were promoting him just a week or so ago.
I mean, I've been aware of him since he dropped his book, Hillbilly Elegy, and he went to Harvard Law School, and it's really, really rare you'd find a genuinely poor white Appalachian guy in the Ivy Leagues. That just doesn't really happen. And like the poor white dudes you would find there, generally they'd be, guys from places like South Boston, or like maybe guys from like the south suburbs of Chicago, but just you're not, if you're Appalachian people, there really is not like upward mobility. If you're from the mountains, there's just not, and he makes that point without presenting himself as some kind of victim. And he also, the wider culture, if we can even speak of such a thing, or the regime values that many people internalize, particularly ambitious people, this is particularly alien to somebody like he was, not just in terms of the fact that, he found these things like morally abhorrent, but it's just, it's literally like a foreign country, like we talked in the pod about people leading parallel but not intersecting lives. He's a good example of that. And the fact that his book became a bestseller very organically. Like I realize there's a lot of NPR types as well as a lot of shitty media types who've kind of made a minstrel out of poor whites, and especially Appalachians. Like they almost look at them like they do, Plains Indians or something, like these kinds of quaint barbaric people that they find curious and kind of intriguing in some sort of condescending way. So I realized initially part of the hype around his book was from people like that, who I speculate didn't even really read the thing, or if they did, it was a very cursory sort of digesting of it. But I mean, anything that's kind of in a positive way, anything that's presenting white Southerners and the white Southern experience, particularly of poor people, not because like I fetishize poor people or something, because I mean, they're people who really are kind of hit hardest by globalism. As our as our non-whites who are in like failing cities like Chicago or Detroit, but that's a different thing. But I mean, obviously, like I've got a lot of sympathy for people like Vance who don't have his intellectual, you know, and emotional resources to escape from those kinds of conditions, because I mean they're the most vulnerable among my own tribe, and they're also, in a real way, cliche as it sounds, you know, they're the backbone of organic America, you know, and an organic America does exist. It's despite what some people claim, including black pill types who who like to say they're on our side, you know, although I find some of them to be not particularly sincere in that regard. But what I'm getting at is that Vance represents kind of a cultural paradigm shift in the way, especially white people, but not just white people, kind of every man on the right um, views the political configuration of the country. Okay, whether he loves or hates Vance, or whether he's no matter where he's situated, kind of on the on the um on the political map. Okay, if we can even think about a big tent right wing in America. I don't think in those terms, but if for conceptual reasons, if you read data on like how people vote, or if you look at the methodology employed by guys like the guys at Trafalgar, who are doing God's work, they're that um they're those data management guys who consistently hit the mark owing to their methodology in corralling poll data. But what I'm getting is that you kind of have, just for purposes, you kind of have to organize people on right and left in a certain in terms of like how they respond to a certain constellation of policy questions. That's what I'm getting at. Okay, and everybody who's nominally on the right side of that is impacted by this kind of paradigm shift, this kind of acknowledgement of people like Vance and what they represent. Like I said, whether they sympathize with that or whether they are affronted by it, or neither. So that's what. Plus, I think Vance is just. I don't get excited about politicians. I generally don't have any use for them. But I much as I like any politician, I like Vance just like I like James Webb a lot. Okay. And I like Donald Trump Jr., man. I think Donald Trump. I think he's the best of the Trumps, frankly. And he stumped very personally and very visibly for Vance, and I don't believe I'm naive. Yeah, okay, obviously, people can cultivate a public image that is at odds with their inner moral uh, constitution. But Donald Trump Jr., I find him a whole lot more likable than his dad, and he seems like a basically upright, normal white dude, and he's you know, he's remarkably plain spoken. I mean, but as is Vance too. But it's you know, I'm impressed by both of them, and they became very much linked in the public mind, and that was interesting to me too. I don't think it would have hurt Vance at all if the Donald Trump had been more out front, but it was very deliberate that Trump's son kind of took center stage there, and all that stuff's very positive. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I'm the consummate pessimist owing to my ethnic and confessional heritage, but there's great grounds for optimism these days, just generally in political terms, and I don't see how people can't see that. And Vance is an example of that. Like, not because Vance would agree with a guy like me. Like, if I sat down with Vance and like spoke to him candidly, like I do to our gang and our friends, like he would probably be horrified, and like he'd probably like recoil, like I was a Geiger alien or something, and that's okay. I'm not saying that guys like Vance, like think like I do or something, but in historical epochal terms, and in psychological and cultural terms, the fact people are behind him does represent a paradigm shift towards something very positive. and that's very exciting. You know, I don't weigh in a lot on electoral questions unless it's something like we were just talking about a moment ago, like about whether or not the inter the issue of intervention and war and peace is going to become a wedge issue or kind of the or kind of a referendum basically for Republican voters, because that really touches and concerns kind of like what I focus on my own like research and writing. But I guys like you fellas are way more kind of plugged into things, well in like practical terms, because you've worked on campaigns and stuff and I've seen this stuff from the inside, but you just got like a better understanding of it. You know, that's why. So I'm not particularly good at picking candidates. In terms of outcomes, I mean, the reason why, I had a lot to say about the 2020 election is because, I mean, pretty much for the whole like linear year of 2020, like I was coding data from presidential elections going back to Truman, and I did it very deliberately. But I mean, I was like this the things I was positing was stuff I was gleaning from those data sets. It wasn't just like me having some grand insight and saying like, you know, I think this will happen just because like, you know, the kind of proverbial like tea leaves emerge and I, you know, I have some kind of intuition for that. But I mean that's why I was plugging Vance and like I said, it's something it it's he's kind of ideal because like I said, he was a public personage and somebody who was highly respected um before he was even considered a viable candidate for public office. You know, he had a lot of cultural cachet and a lot of credibility, and I mean that's important. I think that people who quite literally have people like Obama who've literally done nothing in their life other than I mean, or even had real jobs. You know, their entire kind of adult existence has been as as public relations delegates of a sort. Um, you know, for regime interests. I think increasingly the public is going to reject those types. When the opportunity presents itself, you know, when they can do so in favor of people like Vance, and that's I don't think I'm giving the American electorate too much credit. I've got no illusions about them. They're incredibly they fall incredibly short. But I think I'm onto something. But yeah, forgive me for rambling, man. I didn't mean to take up all the fucking air.
No, and one of the reassuring things about Vance, maybe unlike DeSantis, he has a tendency to talk like Charles Murray or someone like that in that regard.
Definitely.
And to bring it
Very
back to
plain-spoken
Bowden,
dude.
yeah, he and Bowden, you know, he used to be more rare to hear cultural issues as part of the campaign pitch, one of the big hooks, and maybe Enoch Powell is a better parallel. But I think the right is going to take the shift that libertarians kind of took over the course of decades, going from economic issues to social ones. That's
Oh
probably
yeah,
going to be
the time's right for that too, because like these taboos remain intact, but they're it's a fragile intact structure. Like people are weary of that too. Like even people who nominally abide it. Yeah, go ahead. I just wanted to insinuate that.
yeah, I just think that that's the trajectory moving forward, and that's probably going to be the default as well. It's not going to be this outlier like I was saying earlier about Arizona is this outlier for populism. That's
Oh
probably
yeah,
going
no,
to
that's going to become the norm, and it is. And let's also to the Southwest. Like before we went live, like you guys were talking about Austin and stuff. Like cities that are scaled, just in terms of scale, like places like Austin and places like these you know these places that are smaller than cities but bigger than towns. You know, places that have like 100,000 people. That's kind of the ideal scale of um of human density, like for all kinds of reasons. You know, and you're gonna the Southwest is like the future for in a lot of ways, and the Southwest today is kind of like the South was like the traditional South was 60 years ago. I mean, in terms of the electoral map and it, it it's essential. it being essential to capture those states. The only thing that holds the South back potentially is, I think about this a lot because I take for granted that I literally live like on Lake Michigan, so it's just like basically like the largest pile of fresh water on this fucking planet. It's just like right there, like water and water you can actually drink that's a huge issue a lot of places, man, as you guys know because you're out west. Um, that that stuff like that could is what could ultimately sink development in the Southwest. You know, and I mean it's already highly politicized. But I mean that those kinds of issues can be overcome to a degree. But I don't think that in and of itself isn't going to sink this kind of ongoing boom, you know, economic, social, cultural of the southwestern kind of corner of the map. But yeah, and the people who the people who move out there, you know, they're pro gun and they're pro independence. I mean, even if they're not probably right wing, I'm reasonably well traveled. Even the people out there who we wouldn't really consider to be like right wing, like they certainly aren't. They don't think like New York City or Berkeley liberals. I mean, that's, you know, nobody thinks like these people anymore, man. Like that's always coming back to the example of Chernenko and this kind of naked disengagement of the perennial regime in Washington from the realities of, you know, like American life. And this is as people's patterns of living day to day, which, you know, axiomatically inform values and things, like everything else aside. I mean, that's going to be a huge game changer, and it's already starting. So yeah, a lot of positive things are afoot.
And since we all watch similar channels, maybe a good reference point recently was the conversation between Aaron McIntyre and I think it was Pete Kionas, who were talking about kind of the libertarian pipeline and how some people started there, but over time, those two worldviews, conservatism and libertarianism, naturally, and maybe this is part of like some Hegelian cycle, but eventually they do start to filter out a lot of the cringe aspects, the parts that are very dated, economic minded. And Jose, you can probably speak to that. I know you write a lot about these people that are stuck in like this political quicksand and refuse to graduate. I say all the time they won't grow up. You know, you're supposed to maybe start there, but definitely not end up there. And
yeah,
I know
they're
that,
definitely like 21-year-old high school seniors.
no, that's what they are, really. I mean, it's
that's a good way of putting it. Yeah. And honestly, the best case scenario for those people is that they just become Pinkertons for the managerial regime. So that's their career. That's like the peak career track for those types. Yeah, I've dealt with a lot of those people. My time when I was pretty involved in the libertarian movement, it boiled down to the culture issues, man. The more culturally conservative and nationalist leaning libertarians were able to make a good transition in that pipeline to like the dissident right, whereas the more cosmopolitan globalist types that were really into like all like the trendy stuff and into just like degeneracy in general, they have just become like glorified neoliberals now with just like a slightly more radical aesthetic. And yeah, they'll like talk about like downsizing the state while pacting with people that do the exact opposite, which just goes to show these people are just have like zero political sense because they're just so fixated with like open borders or the fact like the new populist Republican Party is like racist and it's like the second coming of like interwar like fascism or clerical fascism or like Nazism. Like a lot of people actually like believe that. I've worked with people like that in the past and they've just gone like totally unhinged. One thing about the Trump movement in general, it really did expose a lot of people like a lot of the psychosis that would like lay dormant among a lot of these people. And it showed who's down with our with like nationalism and who's just like a total sellout for the managerial state. And this globalist parasitic ruling class. And yeah, I've graduated from a lot of like the libertarian stuff. I still have like some leanings on a certain set of issues, but I don't really identify with that movement. And I do collaborate with some and write for like websites like Mises, but I don't consider myself like a card carrying member, like especially of like the Libertarian Party. Like my God, that institution needs to just like get bulldozed. But yeah, there are like some like reasonable types, like especially like the paleo libertarians and like the Hans Hermann Hoppe crowd. But other than that, you won't find much in that movement, and it's very likely, in my opinion, actually, the word libertarian is also going to have like a different meaning in the 21st century because a lot of people don't realize this, that when you translate libertarian to like other languages, like in Spanish, for example, libertario has more of an anarcho-syndicalist, like or like some type of like leftist radical adjacent type of meaning. And I do believe that that word libertarian is going to have like a really different connotation by like say 2050. It's probably just going to be like a signifier for some type of like radical leftist movement that maybe like has like a few deviations on whether or not like some corporation should be like taxed by like 5% or whatever. But yeah, it's probably going to have like a really different meaning. And even like Murray Rothbard, he kind of like took that term from anarchists back then and kind of like made it into his own. But that was like a different time and context because that
Well,
was like,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and like Robert Nozick kind of, Nozick versus Rawls. Like anyone who went to college from like the 70s to like the late 90s, this was kind of, and if you took a class on like, American political theory, that they'd present like the Nozick versus Rawls like debate. It was about the most boring thing you could possibly read, but like Nozick's basically engaged in a thought experiment. It's like, okay, I mean, Hoppe is too, but Hoppe's actually really profound in in what he um in what he posits, and also like Hoppe, by his own admission, he's critiquing what's become articles of faith in the civic culture, and he's assailing like the definition of what's bandied as democracy, but actually is not democracy. That's totally different than like Nozick, saying like, yeah, imagine my utopia where, you know, all transactions are consensual. So if you don't want police services, you're not available to the police. And then, he proceeds, drop, 50 pages long, like how it would work if, say, like, you violate the law, but, the man against whom you've offended, like, he doesn't have the resources on hand, pay the police, provide him with justice. How can that be said to like represent the good? So you like engage in this kind of like tortured, like, you know, philosophical acrobatics to rationalize like why this is still just. But I mean that's nonsense. It's like, okay, that maybe that's interesting if you're some kind of like professor of philosophy or like or like a logician, but you're not talking about like policy or like actual politics there. So it's like, on the one hand, you have people who claim like, oh, that's like libertarianism. It's this kind of like abstract body. It's almost like this thought experiment, that appeals to some people. Then there's other people where like libertarian to them was, they want like weed legalized or like they're into like weird sex stuff. Then there's other people who are like, yeah, I'm like I just believe in like the minimalist state, and it's essentially like an ethical proposition about, you know, that kind of relies on Jeffersonian presumptions about constitutionalism. So yeah, I'm just kind of thinking aloud, but yeah, there's not even like a firm definition of it, and it's unfortunate that Rothbard and Hoppe are lumped into the libertarian camp, even if they themselves didn't run from that, because they're better than that.
Yeah, to piggyback off Rothbard, he died relatively young, and it would have been interesting to see him write about the like Trump moment. I feel like he were alive because he was already kind of, especially in the 90s, exiting from a lot of doctrinaire libertarianism. He was getting pretty red-pilled on mass migration, and he was not buying into the open borders libertarianism that was being pushed at the time, especially from like organizations like the Cato Institute. And it's actually kind of funny because even Milton Friedman was kind of an immigration restrictionist in the context of like a welfare state, and F.A. Hayek too did make some arguments that were almost like vaguely identitarian when it came to restricting immigration. And even funny enough, I think John Hosper is like one of like the first Libertarian Party presidential candidates, became closed borders later on in life, and he used like a combination of like the Friedman and even some quasi-identitarian arguments as well. So yeah, that movement is definitely changing. And like Ron Paul, for example, in his congressional record, especially in the lead up to his first presidential run as a Republican in 07, 08, he was like staunchly against like illegal immigration and wanted like a border wall. And you can even like listen to him on his show now, like the Ron Paul Liberty Report,
right,
with Daniel McAdams, and he'll like say like, yeah, like we need to, instead of focusing on Ukraine's sovereignty, we need to be focusing on our southern border. And this is like something that Douglas McGregor like constantly harps on too.
Well,
and,
yeah.
and
Well, it's also Paul. Yeah, Paul understood or understands that, you know, like a moral consent, like even if you're like a doctrine or libertarian, like absent a moral consensus between parties and absent conceptual agreement, you know, like on what property rights entail, you know, there's got to be a common lingua franca, you know, like in literal terms as well as in conceptual terms. Like otherwise you're pissing into the wind. So that would presume, in my opinion, you know, you know, if not racial homogeneity or something of that order, like at least a compatibility between ethnic groups, you know. And yeah, the human dimension complicates this. I don't want to be a fag or a fucking buzzkill, but I've got to bone up on a bunch of stuff because I'm going live with Frody tomorrow, which is dope, you know, for the film festival. And then I got to record with Mr. Quinones, and which is dope, the second part of the Churchill thing. And I've got to peck out some long form stuff, and then I've got like a social engagement. So I'm gonna try and get some of that done before I go to sleep. So yeah, I'm sorry to dip out, man. Just the things are getting interesting, but let's I mean, you guys feel free to talk amongst yourselves. I'll be in touch with you tomorrow at some point, Ace, but not this week, but subsequent. Jose, if you wanted to come on our podcast, that would be pretty dope. Don't feel pressured, but I mean, we can talk about that later. Just keep it in mind. We'll hash it out over text. But yeah, okay, great, man.
I'm all settled down now. So
awesome. Yeah. No, that's huge. I appreciate it. Okay. Good night, cool people, and thank you, Ace. I appreciate it.
And again, no problem.
Yeah. Be good. Behave yourselves.
Of course, as always. Well, we got some questions in chat. I wanna get to them.
Yeah, we'll do this for like 15 minutes or so. So yeah.
Yeah, no problem. I want to thank Douglas Edward 84, a regular on the show, for sending $2. Thank you so much, man. Just loving the content, guys. Keep it up. Thank you. And I'm gonna scroll up to find, because I did see every time Thomas wears the hat, there's always confusion in the chat, where they think that like he shaved the whole thing off just for the hat. But no, that's not the case. It's I don't know. Maybe people aren't aware of that, but what do we got? Yeah, some more questions. People were mentioning people were mentioning Yoram Hazony's National Conservative Conference is kind of an interesting thing because it does kind of exist as some of the modern gatekeeping on the right, and yet it kind of ushers in a lot of the regular people that we're used to. You know, Tucker, I think JD Vance, and just a lot of people in the online right seem to be associated. So it's one of those tricky things where it's we don't exactly know where the line is between
So that group is pretty intriguing because they're pretty subversive. And I actually agree with Keith Preston of Attack the System. He's this anarchist guy. I'm not obviously I'm not like down for anarchism, but I agree with his take on the national conservatism movement that it's effectively a rebranded form of neoconservatism with like populist elements, because my inclination is that these guys, they're just trying to to get like the US involved like in really dumb like great power competition ventures with China and Russia, to like engender this like really like pseudo nationalistic fervor in the US. And I've actually seen articles from across the political spectrum where a lot of these political hacks think that trying to get the US and like into like World War III will somehow end all the polarization in the US at the moment, which is absolutely asinine. And yeah, I think the national conservatism movement is one of those conduits. Like they talk about a lot of like industrial policy and all this stuff. And there's some of it that has like some merit. Like I do believe like if we're gonna have like a federal government, at least like let's try to fix some of our domestic infrastructure. But I don't believe that replicating Hungary's like child tax credit model or natalist policies will be like what fixes all of America and that stuff. I think that we have like a multi-front battle, from like the open borders to like the degeneracy that's being pushed at like all like schooling institutions, corporations, and then just overall the political correctness culture and a lot of the stuff that emanates from the civil rights revolution, like getting rid of like the Civil Rights Act itself, especially these anti-discrimination provisions, all that's like much more important than industrial policy or like great power competition that this national conservatism movement is pushing. And this is part of the conservative movement that we've seen over the past century, where they'll find like dissident movements and then just channel all their energy into these unproductive causes that just perpetuates the same corrupt ruling classes power and grasp over the political process. So yeah, I'm not down with that stuff.
Yeah, it's really interesting, especially with that Vanity Fair article kind of boosting it into the news cycle. I think it's them and the NatCon conference, and also I think it's the Edmund Burke Foundation, which is in a similar situation where it's run by, if you just look at the people who run it, it's very obvious what's going on there. So it's just more of the same. You know, we shouldn't be surprised. But as someone pointed out in chat, it's harder to keep people who are ostensibly on our side out of those events because our momentum is rising and it's becoming more salient to voters. And so it is a bit of a white pill, the fact that there is that overlap, because it shows that this message isn't hard to ignore.
Yeah, the national conservatism crowd is ultimately going to have to come to grips with the more non-interventionist Tucker right at one point or the other. They're just going to go into irrelevancy. To be honest, it's really like Trump still that's moving the needle for the populist movement more so than Hazony and that crowd. It's really Trump at the end of the day. And that's what matters, because we're in the Trump movement, no matter what a lot of these people want you to believe. Because, yeah, there's like a meme too going around that of trying to create like this anti-Trump style populism, which is not going to work. Like that's a total pipe dream. But I do I do see some value in people who are just getting into politics to get into like some of the national conservatism events. It's not my cup of tea, but it's always good to get experience, and you shouldn't be like that picky when you're like a novice, like political operative. And eventually, a lot of these groups, if people play their cards right and they infiltrate these groups and change like the way their philosophical orientation and the type of policy battles they pursue, you can make some decent gains.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. Who is this? Kangs asks, "What's the potential you guys think for Barron to be Kaiser Trump? Do you think that that's in the cards?" I know that that's a bit of a meme on our side of Twitter, but you know, it's one of those things that maybe it's a long-term investment. Who knows? Who knows? But
I
it is.
wouldn't be shocked, to be honest, if he turns out to be like a pretty prominent political figure. I mean, political dynasties are pretty normal throughout like all forms of polities, whether they're like democratic or like traditional monarchies and whatnot. The Trump family does like seem to be pretty set with it, for the exception of like Ivanka, but like with like Don Jr., I think there's a lot of promise there. He's actually pretty strong on a lot of Second Amendment related issues.
Oh, is that right? I didn't realize that.
Yeah,
That was out there.
I remember this too. Whenever I was working for a Second Amendment organization a few years back, yeah, he was always like pretty solid, and he did tame a lot of his like father's like instincts on that stuff when, especially during like mass shootings, and he was pretty strong voice in T-Rex's ear when it came to a lot of these gun control related issues. And because even though like the Trump administration enacted a bump stock ban, he I do believe that Don Jr. tempered a lot of his father's instincts to probably go like an even more like normie con route of passing like red flag gun confiscation orders, which the types of like Lindsey Graham, Marco Rubio, and all those like stooges were pushing around that time of like the Parkland massacre in 2018. But yeah, I do believe that the Trump family will be politically active, and this will not be the last we'll hear from them, despite what a lot of people are saying about like a post-Trump movement or Trumpism after Trump.
Yeah, the talk about the Trumpism without Trump. I remember when that was first starting to develop, and
Yeah.
it was all the usual suspects. But
Yeah.
that same person, Kangs, asks, oh, where is it? I just had it. Kangs, where? Oh, he's asking how we got to meet Thomas. You could how did you find Thomas's content? I'm always curious how everyone else did too, because it is a very interesting thing.
I've listened to Thomas predominantly through Bronze Age Pervert and Scott Greer. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I found the Thomas heavy metal episode, and I think I may have listened to that one first or the Cold War episode. And I honestly didn't know what to expect, because at that time, that was last year, probably coming up on a year ago almost. But yeah, I just thought that quickly developed, and I didn't even know all the lore either. That's what was funny. I was just listening to his commentary with Scott, and everything else was sort of a shock afterwards, as you can imagine. So
I really liked his first appearance on BAP's show when they were talking about Nuremberg and also just like the wacky foreign policy from like the Bush era to the Obama era. And that's when I really liked Thomas's stuff. And then I just peeped his Twitter profile, and I like the fact that he delves into revisionist history.
Someone wants us to do more rock and roll content. Yeah, I think that may have been in the tweet, but yeah, I was expecting the audience to to pressure Thomas into that. So yeah, if you guys got questions about that, by all means. I know Jose's also a learned man on the subject. I think we were talking about Greta Van Fleet last time, and someone was trying to make the connection between James Burnham and Robert Plant. I don't know exactly how those two mesh, but
Yeah.
we could try we could try if the chat gives us any help. Someone was asking about your last name. I was trying to
Well,
promote your stuff in the comments.
oh, like what's my last name?
Yeah, Nino.
Yeah, Nino, yeah.
Here, I think your Substack was also. I gotta fix the settings too. Yeah, do you know which BAP episode that was? Because I think a lot of his stuff is behind a paywall. So
Yeah, it's behind. That's actually a good question. I'm not too sure the number per se. I could look it up right now, though.
my friend was showing me some highlights on his timeline, and you can imagine it's very overwhelming. I'm in college. I'm just trying to relax, and then this guy drops some BAP quotes on me. You can imagine the type of stuff, but can't. Douglas Edward, if you're still in here, you're gonna have to give me the context for your encounter with a Dutch waitress. That's there's clearly some missing links there. So if you don't mind clarifying.
So check this out. It's episode 51.
Oh, really? All right.
Yeah.
51.
Yeah, episode 51 of
Oh,
Caribbean Rhythms, Thomas 77 and World After 1945.
thank you.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Do we got any more? What do we got? Yeah, for Ed Keeley, if you're still in here. Yeah, I lost my aviators when I went to the theater to see the Batman. They must have fallen in the seats. And then like 2 days later I went back and she found another person's pair of glasses that weren't mine. So that was unfortunate. I did get to take a picture with a Minion. There was a Minion mascot, so that helped me feel a little bit better before having some lunch. So yeah, kind of a hit and miss there. That's the first. Gotcha. All right. And for anyone who's interested, we also, thanks to the chat for recommending us do so, there is a Discord for anyone who's interested. We just got mostly Thomas lore, as you can imagine, in the Discord. So I'll put that in chat again. And whoops, I will if anyone's interested in joining, it's a pretty open invitation since we got some viewers here. Thank you, Douglas. Thank you for getting back so quickly. We're trying to see. That sounds pretty rough, Douglas. Yeah, I don't know what the right call is to make. Jose, do you date a woman that's taller than you? What are your thoughts on that?
On dating a woman that's taller than me?
Yeah, thoughts?
Oh, I don't really have a problem with that, to be honest. There's some tall chicks that I'm pretty into, so yeah.
Yeah, that I can imagine that can cause some division, but yeah, Douglas is backing out. I don't know, man. If you're what is it, the boomers in town we're trying to set? I don't know, man. That might have been a good deal for all you know, since you kind of walked away while you were ahead. I'm not sure. Maybe. Who knows, man. All right. I think we got everyone's as far as I know. Is he? And then Charlemagne was asking about is Trump mounting a comeback since he wasn't paying attention to Trump, and neither was I, to be frank. But yeah, it looks like it. I saw there was some article about how he's been quiet, and that kind of speaks volumes, ironically. But yeah, that does seem to be the play. Well, all right, Jose, thank you for sticking by, for out competing Thomas. I don't think that's ever happened before. So I appreciate you stopping by and answering some questions on a Friday night. I know you got some plans tonight, so I'll leave you to that. I know that that's important, but thank you, man. Thank you for
no
stopping
problem.
by.
No, I thoroughly enjoy chatting with you guys. You guys drop some major knowledge, and it's always good to exchange that.
Thank you, man. And you too. Do you want to plug the stuff you got going on? I know you got a couple things.
Yeah, I'll plug my Substack. My Substack is Jose Nino Unfiltered. That's where I have all my written content. Then also my podcast, El Nino Speaks, is on there. You can catch that as well on Apple and Spotify. And then I have my own Patreon and Subscribestar for the Nino File. That's for the people who want to learn about political strategy and how to be effective in politics. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, man. And thank you always for stopping by. Always appreciate it. And thank everyone for tuning in, all the regulars. I see you in here. And be sure to get back. We'll probably be back. I know Thomas has been busy with Pete, probably within the next few days here. And then, of course, Mind Phaser. It looks like we're going to be this trio will return for the Mind Phaser, which is, I think, $5 a month. So you're going to want to check that out, as always. Thank you guys for stopping by. And as always, have a great rest of your evening.